Very cynical, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's really disappointing because at a time when, you know, I personally obviously really believe in the role of the media and the integrity of journalism, and I think what we've seen is a race to be first, which has trumped the need to be right, you know, to be accurate, and so something like this happens, and it really, I don't know, like you say, it plays into people's ideas of conspiracy theories, and I think it does undermine the point that they're trying to make, because they got it wrong with this one.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders kicked out of a Virginia restaurant with her family because she works for Donald Trump, asked to leave by the owner, who felt she had certain standards that she had to uphold, like honesty and compassion and cooperation. That was the owner of the Red Hen in Lexington. Whatever you think of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, she is only the messenger, isn't she? Would you blacklist people in PR who represent tobacco companies? Would you snub top lawyers because they defend murderers? Where does this end, do you think? What did you think of her being kicked out?
She's a public servant. I don't know. I thought that whole thing was pathetic. I certainly wouldn't want her for dinner, and I don't think she's necessarily a very nice person. But I actually think she was actually seemed like the mature one. She actually dealt with it and said, "Look, you know, and respected." And even the person who did it said that she was very respectful. So I find the whole thing kind of bizarre, really.
What about you?
Kind of backfired, didn't it? I think it's always interesting to find where the line's drawn between combatants and like you say, public servants or, you know, non-combatants. And you see this in interviews, and, you know, people will accept a politician being given a really hard time, but if you are really cruel to someone who, you know, can, for the sake of whatever be said, to just be doing their job, the sympathies shift a bit. So, yeah, I mean, like you say, I wouldn't want her for dinner, but I don't think it's turned out terribly well for the restaurant.
I think there's some basic decorum that you should have, regardless if you disagree with someone. And you know, many of the people who are getting mad at that situation are the same people who would be holding up someone else who was holding that office in a different party. And, you know, lies have been told all the time. I don't know. I think that there's a certain dignity that you should have, or respecting someone else's point of view.
Yeah.
And I feel like that went aside with that whole incident.
And it is interesting. There's a great book called Kill All Normies, which is about the online culture wars and how how we've become so extreme on either side, and you can't even entertain the views of someone who doesn't share your political views. And you see this a little bit on Twitter. Even to mention some people's names is to be piled on for even saying that they might have a point. And I find that really concerning because, you know, I have my own political views, but I'll listen to anyone because no political side has a monopoly on good ideas, and there's not as much of that as I think I'd like to see. And and online does kind of encourage that tribalism and that you know, extreme upholding of one side, and we can't talk to anyone who's not our team kind of thing.
We've had just before we go the odd homegrown singer massacre the anthem at internationals, it seemed, but then up stepped Crystal Collins. Would you expect Crystal Collins to say something like, "I lost my earpiece, I didn't know what was going on"?
God, I feel so sorry for her. That's your, like, adult nightmare of getting up in the assembly naked, you know, like, it's the worst.
Okay, she's got your sympathy, but not the sympathy of New Zealand Rugby League. Dean Hall, thank you very much. Lovely to have you on. Come back,
Thanks
please.
for having me.
And
Definitely.
Emma Espiner. Thanks, Emma.
Good up.
Tō mara e hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere, he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, getting to and from Gisborne via the north is now a very long and winding road indeed. The Waiōeka Gorge is closed, and that's Highway 2. For how long, and what's plan B? It's going to get cold, very cold in much of the country, and stay wet, very wet in Auckland. What impact has the government's zero fee policy had on university enrolments? John Gerritsen, our education correspondent, asks that. Donald Trump resiles from family separations, then doubles down on his anti-illegal immigrant rhetoric. And no one will ever have an excuse for not singing the national anthem again, because unless you're a chainsaw, you can't be as bad, bless her, as Crystal Collins.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, I'm Susana Leatawa. It's being claimed that Inland Revenue Systems won't be able to cope with the introduction of parts of the government's flagship Families Package this weekend. 4,000 public sector staff at the organisation and at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment have announced strike action for next month, and Inland Revenue's under stress systems, and one reason being given. Here's our political reporter, Gia Garrick.
Inland Revenue is laying off a third of its staff, despite PSA members there saying its systems are unable to cope with current and upcoming changes. The Best Start payment, a $60 a week payment for new mums and dads up until their baby is 1, is set to begin this Sunday. But Inland Revenue staff say they are being told they will have to process each new payment manually. The PSA also says the organisation is refusing to increase pay modestly across the board. At the same time, it says MB is spending millions of dollars on contractors while denying its staff a cost of living pay increase. From Parliament, Gia Garrick.
Fresh produce growers in Gisborne and Bay of Plenty say better infrastructure is needed after a major slip closed the main route between the regions. It could take a week to remove the 7,000 cubic metre slip on the Waiaweka Gorge, adding hours of travel time for motorists forced to drive up the East Cape instead. One of the country's largest fruit and vegetable growing regions, Gisborne relies on the short route to get produce out while it's still fresh. The chief executive from Leaderbrand Produce Gisborne, Richard Burke, says the company uses the road up to 5 times a day.
We've got to look at all options with a blank piece of paper and go, what is it going to take? Because we can continue to look at repairing this, but at the end of the day, look at the Manawatu Gorge, which they've pulled the pin on or whatever they're at with that. If that happens to us with the Waiaweka Gorge, that's pretty serious for us as a region. So I think we've really got to look at how secure that link is and what it means for the region.
Richard Burke from Leaderbrand Produce Gisborne. A Levin man says he and his neighbours have been left in limbo as a major roading project is re-evaluated. In April, the Transport Agency said Otaki to Levin Expressway was being looked at again in the light of the government's draft policy statement on land transport. Now the agency says a decision on how the route between the two towns will be upgraded will be made in 2 or 3 months. A Levin man, Simon Burgess, says parts of the community, unsure if a road will run through their land, have been left in limbo.
We don't know what's going to happen and when, and so I don't know. It still hangs over your head, but you can't really do much about it, so you just have to pretend it's not happening, ignore it, and hope that it might go away, which is unrealistic, but what else can we do, really? Everything's on hold.
Simon Burgess says 2 of the options put forward earlier this year for the road run through his property. Met Service is forecasting snow down to 200 metres, wintry rain and thunderstorms for the lower South Island tonight. A heavy snow watch will be in force from 6 o'clock this evening. Meteorologist Tui McInnes says a large trough sitting around the south of New Zealand is injecting cold air over the country as it moves to the northeast.
Southwesterly, so it's coming from quite far south, which means it's of course really, really cold. And it's quite windy, and then embedded in this flow are a number of fronts, and of course they're also bringing wet to us. Down south where it's a bit colder, they're of course getting quite a bit of snow, which we're already starting to see in a number of places.
Mr McInnes says regions along the west coast could face thunderstorms with hail and strong wind gusts. Recep Tayyip Erdogan has won a second term as President of Turkey. He secured nearly 53% of the vote, while his AK party was set for an overall majority in Parliament. His main challenger, Muharrem İnce, reportedly accepted defeat but added that it was not a fair race. The BBC's Mark Lowen reports from Istanbul.
Amidst the joy that erupted from Erdogan supporters in Istanbul, there was relief too. Polls had suggested he would struggle to win this election in the first round and that he could lose his parliamentary majority. He'll now adopt sweeping new powers, abolishing the post of Prime Minister and weakening Parliament. The opposition had hoped for so much more. With a charismatic candidate in Muharrem İnce, they felt the side of Turkey that loathes the president's authoritarianism would finally show its strength. Turkey is now an autocracy with a democratic facade.
Mark Lowen in Istanbul. It's 5:04. In sports news, 8 of the 30 athletes in the New Zealand weightlifting team will miss out on the Oceania Championships in New Caledonia this week after failing to log their daily whereabouts with drug testers. The form must be completed quarterly. Weightlifting New Zealand's High Performance Director Simon Kent says athletes were caught out with newly introduced timeframes for submitting the forms.
Prior to a major competition, this needs to be done 2 months in advance. But due to the tight timeframes of selections and whatnot, some of the athletes fell outside of the timeframe that was given to us. And unfortunately, that's why they are not permitted to lift at the Oceania Championships.
Simon Kent. The All Blacks flanker Adi Savea, who limped off the field early in Saturday night's 49-14 test win over France, looks set for a stint on the sidelines. The Hurricanes assistant coach Jason Holland says Savea will miss this weekend's Super Rugby clash against the Brumbies in Canberra due to an ankle sprain, but he has full confidence in Savea's recovery.
Ard's got a high ankle sprain, which has definitely ruled him out of this week, and he's likely to be 2 to 3 weeks before we get Ards gets back on the park. Apart from that, we've got guys who haven't had too much footy in the international series, and I'm sure they'll be raring to go.
The Hurricanes assistant coach Jason Holland. That's the news.
MPI targets a woodworker.
They have an absolutely chaotic paperwork system that nobody ever can understand. They investigate, they don't like me.
Turkey targets journalists.
We're on a downward spiral here. There's over 180 journalists who are in jail. The opposition papers have been shut down. The government controls 80-90% of the media.
And restaurants target obesity.
Tackling childhood obesity is a great idea. There's going to have to be lots of different tools in that toolbox to tackle that issue.
On Target, Morning Report with Guy Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, good health to you, leading colorectal surgeon Michael Levitt on his new book, Demystifying One of the Body's Most Basic Functions. And after 10, author Sally Berridge tells the story of her remarkable seafaring great-grandmother. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Reports on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Showers, some heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms in the west, easing late tomorrow. Snow to about 700 metres tonight and 500 metres tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, a few showers, mostly about the ranges today, then mainly about the coast tomorrow. Snow to 500 metres in Wairarapa tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine today. A few showers tomorrow, some heavy with hail and snow to 500 metres. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, apart from Clutha. Fine, however, frequent showers and snow to 100 metres in Otago tonight. And coastal Canterbury and Marlborough tomorrow with snow to 400 metres. Bulla and Westland, showers, some heavy with hail, clearing from the south tomorrow. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha. Wintry showers persistent this evening with snow to 100 metres overnight. Chatham Islands, showers today, then fine tomorrow. It's 7 minutes past 5. You're with John Campbell on Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Susanna. Lovely to have you here. Thank you. Thanks everyone for being with us. We begin tonight in Gisborne or not, as the case may be, because the main route to and from the city from the North State Highway 2 between Gisborne and Te Pōtiki has been cut off after thousands of cubic metres of earth and rock tumbled onto the road quite spectacularly. It could take more than a week to remove the slip, adding hours of travel time for motorists forced to use the East Cape instead. That's through Tolaga Bay, Ruatoria, Tokomaru Bay and so on. Stunning to visit, yes, but as a freight route, problematically slow. Unlike the closure of the Manawatu Gorge, Plan B here really isn't an answer at all. This will come at a cost for one of the country's largest fruit and vegetable growing regions, which relies on the shorter route to get produce around the country while it's still fresh. Eva Corlett reports.
That's the sound of 7,000 cubic metres of stone bowling its way down the bank and flattening a yellow road barrier before settling in an enormous dusty heap across the 2 lanes of State Highway 2. A motorist, Michael Tabudravu, who was just a few metres away, filmed it happening yesterday afternoon.
I filmed a couple of videos. On the first one, it was like a little slip and the little rock almost hit me, so I ran out of the way. And then the big one came down and it was pretty loud. I didn't find it that scary. It was more of like an adrenaline rush, I reckon. Yeah, there's heaps of rocks coming down everywhere, like a river.
The Waiueka Gorge is notorious for its big slips that cause roadblocks, some for weeks or months at a time. The alternative route from Gisborne to Opotiki involves a 5-hour journey around the East Cape, more than double the usual 2 hours. For growers in the region, it's a major headache. The chief executive of Leaderbrand Produce Gisborne, Richard Burke, says the company normally uses the road up to 5 times a day. Mr Burke says Leaderbrand brings produce in from across the region and then it heads to distribution centres in Auckland and Palmerston North.
The Auckland leg of the trip, which is the biggest market, requires us to go around through Napier and up, and there's an extra cost in that, but right now the Napier Road is not in good shape either. You know, there's been quite a lot of weather events south of Gisborne as well as in Gisborne, and the road in that direction is not overly stable either and certainly carries more risk for us.
Mr Burke says that's a problem not only for his company, but its customers who suffer delays or delivery cancellations.
It's one of the things you face when you do business in the region, and you know there's a big push to increase the productivity of the regions, but these are the things that really make that job difficult.
He says it's a regional issue that requires imagination.
We've got to look at all options with a blank piece of paper and go, what is it going to take? Because we can continue to look at repairing this, but at the end of the day, look at the Manawatu Gorge, which they've pulled the pin on or whatever they're at with that. If that happens to us with the Waiweka Gorge, that's pretty serious for us as a region. So I think we've really got to look at how secure that link is and what it means for the region.
And growers aren't the only ones worried. The Mayor of Opotiki, John Forbes, says the road closure can hinder medical treatment.
Things like specialised dialysis and that kind of stuff from Gisborne, who would normally travel either to Waikato Hospital in Hamilton or to some of the tertiary specialist services in Auckland. The extra drive to go around East Cape can be really trying, especially for people that are unwell and that are suffering. So those extra distances can be quite significant.
Mr Forbes says the gorge is an important access route and needs to be in a condition that, if slips do happen, it's closed for a matter of hours, not days. The Transport Agency's Mark Owens says crews are doing everything they can to get the road open, but it's a difficult environment.
Particularly in this area where there's a long gorge, lots of high, steep mountains or hills next to the road, which is next to the river. It's a very challenging road environment, and so we just need to assess it and make sure we can make it as safe as possible.
Mr Owens says building a new road in the area would be a challenge given the length of the network and terrain. He says a similar-sized slip last year took 9 days to clear. Drivers are being warned to take extra care on detours via Napier this week because of forecast ice and snow. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Eva Colette tēnei.
And later in the programme we will talk to NZTA about that road and Plan B or otherwise. The Executive Director of the Royal New Zealand Ballet has quit, but nobody wants to talk about it. On Friday, the RNZB released a statement saying Frances Turner had resigned after 2.5 years at the helm. Checkpoint set up an interview with the company's newest board member, Reverend Toby Bean, to discuss Ms Turner's exit amid recent turmoil, which had seen up to 20 of the company's dancers leave over the past year. Former State Services Commissioner Doug Craig was asked last year to lead an inquiry into claims of historic workplace bullying and intimidation, and the company struggled to retain dancers, particularly New Zealand dancers. His review found the company's policies for dealing with employee complaints were broadly appropriate, but it needed to be clearer on who should intervene in cases of workplace bullying. But Checkpoint understands a further 3 dancers have left the company in the past 3 months. Reverend Bean had agreed to a pre-recorded interview at 3:15 on Friday afternoon to discuss the RNZB culture and Ms Turner's resignation. He was happy to do the interview, but the interview was cancelled by the company's communications staffer just a few minutes before it was due to take place. We were instead promised an interview with either Ms Turner or the board chairperson, Stephen Fife, today. Neither of those interviews have eventuated, despite the assurances we received on Friday. Checkpoint intends to pursue this story, and we intend to pursue an interview. 14 minutes past 5. Conservationists are mounting legal challenges to 2 major development projects in the far north. Forest and Bird is poised to go to the High Court over peat mining plans at Kaimaumo, and the Department of Conservation is appealing consents granted to avocado growers to tap into an aquifer. Lois Williams reports.
DOC has lodged an appeal with the Environment Court against water take consents granted to 17 avocado growers north of Kaitaia. Hundreds of hectares of land, including former dairy farms, have been planted out on avocados in the past couple of years in the expectation the growers would get water. And independent commissioners acting for the Northland Regional Council granted them consent this month to draw more than 2 million cubic metres a year from the Opori aquifer. DOC objected strongly at the time, saying the council doesn't have the research to support that decision. Its statutory manager Hamish Eglinton says that is the basis of the appeal.
We just don't think enough is known about the potential effects. There doesn't seem to be a lot of scientific advice and a lot of background and data on what effects this will have.
Mr Eglinton says at stake is the Kaimomo wetland. It's of national importance and the effect of the massive groundwater take is uncertain. DOC is appealing against the conditions of the consent and the way the council intends to manage the water take. The avocado growers, some of them big investors, were expecting DOC to appeal. Locals were less certain, but those who've been worried the avocados will suck up all the water and leave nothing for them are cheering. Deer farmer George Stanisic says there's an awful lot at stake for residents of the Opori Peninsula who rely on bore water.
No one knows how much is under there to start off with. They're only guessing. And what happens then, they take the fresh water out, the salt water comes in. Bang, you're buggered. The whole aquifer underneath is contaminated with salt water.
The council believes it can avoid that disaster by monitoring the bores, but in its appeal, DOC says the council's failed to have proper regard for the cumulative effects on the aquifer. Forest and Bird, meanwhile, is challenging another proposed development in the Kaimomo wetland. In April, the Regional Council gave the Auckland company Resin and Wax consent to mine peat on Ngai Takoto land, extracting valuable compounds from the soil. Forest and Bird's lawyer, Sally Jepp, says she's been instructed to file for a judicial review of that decision, pending some last-minute talks with the developers.
They have asked for a bit more time to go away and look at that. It basically relates to information about which parts of the site are particularly important, and we'll consider that. And we certainly don't launch into legal proceedings lightly, but we'll see what they come back with and make a final decision next week.
Sally Jepp says Forest and Bird has sympathy for Ngai Takoto's wish to develop land it bought back with its treaty settlement, but she says peat mining could damage the ecology of the Kaimomo wetland, and it's important that Northland develops in a sustainable way.
And that includes iwi being able to use land. In this case, the land that has been bought is a regionally significant wetland, the second most important wetland in the region. So our concern is really with how the council has dealt with the ecological effects of this.
The Northland Regional Council says it's been dealing with numerous OIA requests from Forest and Bird and DOC about the peat mining consents, and DOC says it's still considering whether it too should challenge them in the High Court. In Northland for Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
18 minutes past 5. Donald Trump says people who enter the United States illegally should be sent back to wherever they came from immediately without any judicial process. Facing a public outcry and pressure even from within his Republican Party, Mr Trump last week reversed his policy of separating migrant children from their parents at the borders so the adults could be detained and prosecuted, a process that typically takes months. Since buckling on that issue, Mr Trump has redoubled his criticism of US immigration laws on Twitter and in speeches likening illegal immigrants to invaders trying to break into the country. The ABC's Emily Burke reports.
The protests against the Trump administration's immigration policies are continuing. The latest demonstration was near a border town processing centre in Texas, where a tent city is temporarily housing children suspected of illegal border crossings. But far from trying to quell the public outcry, President Trump has ratcheted up the language in a series of tweets.
We cannot allow all of these people to invade our country. When somebody comes in, we must immediately, with no judges or court cases, bring them back from where they came. Our system is a mockery to good immigration policy and law and order. Most children come without parents.
And then?
Our immigration policy, laughed at all over the world, is very unfair to all those people who have gone through the system legally.
His comments have attracted immediate criticism from legal experts and immigrant advocates who say the US Constitution's provisions around due process are now threatened.
This is an issue about what is right and what is wrong.
Julian Castro is a former US Secretary of Housing and Urban Development.
People throughout the country, people of every different background, as you can see here, have come together to say that this is not who we should be in the United States of America or anywhere. The problem is that this president and his administration, they use cruelty as a hobby. Incompetence is their standard operating procedure. Division is their tool. And we cannot leave it to chance. We need to verify that these children are being reunited with their parents.
Last week, the President issued an executive order that ended the separations, but the government is yet to reunite more than 2,000 children with their parents. For those children in limbo, the US Senate's top Democrat, Chuck Schumer, has called for a White House reunification czar.
The kids are under jurisdiction of Health and Human Services, the parents under the Justice Department. What we found out over the years is when there are separate agencies trying to solve a single problem, it works slowly at best and sometimes doesn't work at all. There are thousands of kids lost in limbo. There are thousands of parents waiting. Word is that the process could take a very long time, much longer than it should. And so we have to find a way to expedite the process, to move quickly and strongly. And that's what a czar would do.
That's Chuck Schumer, who is, of course, the Senate's top Democrat, ending that report from the ABC. Home again, snow is falling and, quote, aggressively cold weather is expected to move from the south up the country over the next 24 hours. Yes, it's winter, and yes, this is winter weather, but it's worth reminding ourselves of the stock risks, road closures, black ice on the roads, snow on the roads, and some brutally cold winds heading our way. And Aucklanders who've had enough of the rain, well, there's more rain to come. Let's start in the south, where as Met Service meteorologist Georgina Griffiths warns us the cold, cold, cold is coming from.
Well, progressively colder air. I mean, we've seen good snow down south. We've had the Crown Range Road closed earlier today and some decent snowfall accumulations at height. But we're only really just starting to begin pushing that cold air across the country. So we've got a lot of road snows in place for tonight, for the snow to return to low levels in the south tonight, including the Dunedin Highway for a couple of centimetres in the overnight period. Crown Range again gets a fairly good top-up overnight, and all of the high altitude South Island passes gets further snow until tomorrow morning. And of course, the North Island doesn't miss out either, John. We see that southerly, the really cold air starting to come in with a bit of a burst. In fact, a good southerly gale kick into Wellington just before lunchtime tomorrow, Tuesday, and that brings a burst of colder air over the North Island. In fact, Remataka Hill Road has a road snow for just a couple of centimetres around the summit tomorrow afternoon and evening. And the Desert Road, we've had a couple of flurries already just at the top, but expecting the freezing level and that cold air to drop into tomorrow, especially after tomorrow afternoon and after dark, where we expect a road snow warning in force for 5 to 10 centimetres of snow later tomorrow. So that's quite impactful for people trying to move around. And of course, then if we keep cold in the week. This week signals very cold, and then we go into frost and black ice Thursday for the South Island in particular, and Friday for the North Island. So just a bit of care travelling on the roads and keeping up to date with which roads are open, which ones have snow and or ice on. That'd be the key for people trying to move around this week, John.
Yeah, the black ice is dangerous, and we'll look out for road closures as the week goes on. This is fairly typical for June, July, isn't it? But we forget and are shocked back into remembrance every year by how brutally cold that southerly can be.
Yeah, I mean, it's not abnormal for this time of year when we're late June, and we've had actually a couple of really good or cold southerly outbreaks over New Zealand quite early in the year, remember, in April and also in May. And so this is kind of the characteristics of this winter that we're seeing is once we get a southerly, we're getting 3 to 4 days of it, and then a good hard ridge coming in behind, which in wintertime spells frost and fog. So, yeah, I think that might be the flavour of the winter. So, of course, take care on the roads, people, but, you know, there are some winners, and those would be the ski fields.
Georgina, just before we move on, is it ever going to stop raining in Auckland? And why does anyone live in the city in the J months, June and July? God, it's awful.
Really good question. I mean, actually, I'm looking at the year-to-date, the rainfall right across the country, and there are not many places that have had a guts full of the rain, John, or haven't had a guts full of the rain. And haven't already tracked well above where they should be for the time of year. And Auckland, in fact, the Waikato, Taranaki North, the Western North Island has indeed had far too much rain already, and we're only just starting the true winter, our winter rain regime. We do eventually stop raining. There's a bit of work, for Auckland in particular, there's worse to come. So tomorrow looks actually worse than today for us. Those brief, short, sharp, heavy showers continue, and they're laced with hail, of course. And we see an intensification of those around noon as one of those cold fronts moves through. There's quite a few of them. And finally, we see a clearance. Windy as, cold as, and the showers only finally clear Tuesday afternoon. So the showers do start to migrate away from where people live, Tuesday in the South Island and Tuesday night up here. But really, it's just those cold days that really signals there's a cold day tomorrow and frosty mornings Thursday and Friday. So cold week overall.
Georgina Griffiths from the Met Service, just looking at the latest email in at 5:04 from Thomas Luke and the people at the Christchurch Transport Operations Centre. They do a fantastic job updating us on the South Island roads, and I'm just looking, there are a huge number of warnings for black ice. Central Otago, North Otago, South Canterbury, inland, and when it gets up, although Omarama's not that high, is it? Anyway, lots of black ice warnings there. Do please take care if you are driving really in the lower half of the South Island at any kind of altitude at all. We turn now with some trepidation, although perhaps our tongue-in-cheek, to the tuneless subject of the national anthem, the Kiwis versus England Rugby League test in Denver over the weekend. You'd be generous to argue the New Zealand national anthem is stunningly tuneful to start with. The melody, such as it is, was written by a man in a single evening to win a competition judged by 3 Australians. But it seldom sounded worse than it did prior to the test match the Kiwis went on to lose. Now, for anyone thinking the anthem put New Zealand off, the Kiwis actually started well, perhaps galvanised by the noise, getting out to a 12-0 lead but ending up losing 36-18. That means the Kiwis have won just 3 of their last 11 games. A new coach and high hopes for what he can achieve. The brand new CEO of New Zealand Rugby League, Greg Peters, tuned in to watch, hopeful as we all were, and then he heard the anthem.
Yeah, I was in my lounge at home in Wellington, and it was only my first week in the job, so I elected not to travel over to Denver with the team. I thought it was more important for me to be local and getting to grips with the job. So, yeah, unfortunately, I was sitting in my lounge with my young son watching the game and was shocked and appalled as everyone else was.
For anyone who was watching or listening who hasn't heard it, we're just going to play a little bit now. We're just going to fade it up underneath so we can revel really in the true awfulness of it. I think that's probably enough. The really good thing,
it's more than enough. Could you perhaps delete it? Can we delete that everywhere? Is it possible to do that these days? Even my son could sing that better than that.
Well, I mean, that's the good thing. Every cloud has a silver lining, and now those of us who are tone deaf will be able to sing the national anthem with pride, because we can't be worse than Crystal, surely.
Yeah, very, very disappointing. And as I understand it, we've spoken to the people over there. Our people on the ground over there have obviously relayed our strong disappointment at that performance, and apparently she had rehearsed it in the changing room immediately before going on and was toned and word perfect, and then just lost it on the field. So, but still inexcusable.
Yeah, that makes it. I'm sorry for laughing, because that's dreadful for her. So they knew there was a bilingual Māori English national anthem. Everyone was on top of that. They knew that this was very much part of the requirements of the Kiwis playing in Denver.
Yeah, the promoters and the stadium people were across national anthem requirements, and as you probably noticed, the English national anthem wasn't that wonderful either. So she got it wrong on a couple of fronts.
Yeah, in fact, I thought she got worse as she went on. Bless her. I thought the Māori, in fact, was the high point.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for her, but obviously we've got to get the stuff right. It's not good enough for us. It's not good enough for, as a proud Kiwi, I certainly don't want to see that stuff happening, and I'm sure your listeners don't either.
And what about your players? What did they make of it all as they were standing here thinking, what the hell is this?
Well, I thought they did a wonderful job because, again, the reports from people who are on the ground and standing on the sideline lined up, listening and trying to sing that national anthem. The boys were full of voice and sung it strongly and did us proud, I think, given the tricky situation they found themselves in.
Yeah. Can we talk about the game that followed? Gosh, they started well, didn't they? But that second half, England just owned it.
Yeah. I mean, it's new for rugby league playing at altitude, and I don't think you want to use that as an excuse. But the altitude and the heat is certainly something different for any athlete to come to grips with. But I think they started with some really good signs, and I know, having talked to Michael yesterday, he was very happy. Not with the result, obviously, but with the way that the young group that he had together had responded both to to the challenge of the game, but also to what he's trying to bring into the team.
And this is Michael Maguire, for people who are listening who don't know rugby league. So this is Michael Maguire. This is his first Test as coach. He's replacing David Kidwell, who parted ways with New Zealand Rugby League at the end of last season after those losses to Fiji and Tonga in the World Cup. It's time to start winning, though, now, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, no one pulls on the black jersey in New Zealand and doesn't want to go out and win. So whilst there were encouraging signs, we want to get on with the job, and we've got a triple header coming up in Auckland on the 13th of October against Australia with the Kiwis, Kiwi Ferns and the junior Kiwis. So that's our next big event and big match, and I'm sure Michael will be working really hard to ensure we do very well in that match.
Greg Peters, who is the new CEO of New Zealand Rugby League. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. Coming up, the Bulls hold on to half of Yarrow Stadium in Taranaki. An earthquake risk in parts. Auckland's train commuters will hear te reo Māori on their journeys. And animal cruelty or pest control. Animal welfare groups are outraged after footage released on social media shows a man striking a stunned possum so hard it flies back into the air. It is actually fairly appalling. We'd love your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We are, of course, on Twitter and Facebook. Lots of people, Susanna, saying how much they are enjoying you reading the news.
Oh, that's so lovely.
So give them an example with the headlines.
Here we go. Headlines at 5:30. The IRD systems are being blamed for 4,000 public servants taking strike action next month. Public Service Association members in Inland Revenue and the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment have announced 2-hour strikes on the 9th and the 23rd of July. Inland Revenue is laying off a third of its staff despite programs such as the Best Start payments to new parents set to start this Sunday. Produce growers in Gisborne and the Bay of Plenty are calling for better infrastructure after a major slip closed the road between the regions. The slip will add hours of travel time for motorists and take at least a week to clear. The Chief Executive for Leaderbrand Produce Gisborne, it's Richard Burke, says the country needs to look at a long-term solution because his company, For One, uses the road up to 5 times a day. A live-in man says he and his neighbours are in limbo over a transport agency decision to delay building the Otaki to Live-in Expressway. The agency says it will decide in 2 to 3 months. But Simon Burgess says parts of the community are unsure about the future. He says one proposal had the road running through his property. Another cold snap is on the way, with Met Service forecasting snow to 200 metres, wintry rain and thunderstorms for the lower South Island tonight. Meteorologist Tui McGuinness says a large trough in the south is injecting cold air over the country as it heads northeast. He says southwesterly weather is coming from quite far south, with a number of fronts bringing rain. And 15 fire engines are fighting a blaze at an old picture theatre in Auckland. Emergency services were called to the theatre down Great North Road in Point Chevalier just before 4 this afternoon. Auckland Transport says the road is closed between Huia Road and Point Chevalier Road. Fire and Emergency Shift Manager Scott Osmond says the fire is under control and no one has been hurt.
Thank you very much indeed, Susanna. We appreciate it. 26 minutes to 6. You know, this is really odd, but you have to walk out behind us while we talk. It feels very strange. Yeah, I know you won't want to do it because you'll feel very rude. But look, it wasn't at all rude. Thanks, Susanna. Nona's back.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm feeling pretty good,
Good.
yes.
We're delighted to have you back. Outdoor goods reel sale at Kathmandu is on track for a big lift in profit on the back of a strong second half.
Yeah. Now, this is a company that we heard about some time ago when Rod Duke of Briscoe was trying to take the company over and didn't succeed, but he did keep his 20% stake, and he must be pretty happy because the company presented a plan and they've managed to execute it well.
He sniffs fairly like a mouse sniffs
cheese. He really has. He's got to be happy with this because, look, the company is making bigger margins and getting higher prices on increased sales. And so as a result of that, they lifted their net profit guidance up. Now, they were even surprised by their own success. So they are expecting to make a net profit in the range of $48 to $52 million, which is 10 to 14 million better than last year, which is, quite a good increase in a retail market, which is fairly tough. And they've done it through innovation, a brand refresh, a focus on their customers, their online business. And of course, recently they also took on their footwear company, Oboz, and so they're partnering with them in North America for footwear, and that's going well for them too. So overall, the company's looking pretty hot.
Good for you, Kathmandu. Threats against directors' safety has prompted a privacy review of the company's register. This is fascinating because there's pretty open access to this, isn't there?
Yes.
What's been happening?
Well, this has been going on for, the company's register and the directors' addresses and stuff has been kind of something just normal. But in the last year or so, the company's office had 10 requests from directors asking that their personal details be removed for privacy reasons. And they've received, notices that some directors and their family members have received threats. So they've asked, the company's offices, through the Ministry of Business, or MB, have asked that their submissions be made, and that's their plan, is to remove the personal information and only provide an address for the service of documents and so on.
Okay, so because I think it's vitally important we're able to know who the directors are immediately and easily, but what the argument is, we don't have to know where they live.
Right, so as long as there's an address for service, the names of the directors are there, that should suffice. That's what the company's office is looking to do. The public and other people have until August 3rd to make a submission on this.
5 weeks, yeah.
Yeah, and they're inviting that, but it makes sense. In this day of social media, people's addresses and so on are really something you don't necessarily want to have published just for everyone to see, right?
People have strong opinions on that. Text us 2101.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Nona. What happened on the markets today?
Well, we closed down just 3 points, which isn't bad. We did reach above that 9,000 mark again intraday, but we didn't close there. We closed at 8,996, so just below that 9,000 mark, which is pretty good because Asian markets were basically down. There's a lot of concern, as there has been, and oil prices have slumped after the OPEC and Russia agreed to increase their output. No one knows exactly how much that's going to be. That sent a jitter through the market. So the New Zealand dollar is trading at 69 cents US, 92.9 Australian, and 52 pence.
Nona Peltier, lovely to have you back. Thank you. Coming up to 22 minutes to 6, what impact has the government's zero fee policy had on university enrolments? There's been a 0.3% increase in university enrolments in 2018, bucking an official forecast for another fall in student numbers in the wake of last year's 1,000 student drop. Universities New Zealand says the zero fee policy has had next to no impact on their enrolments. But our education correspondent John Gerritsen found students in Wellington telling a different story.
Universities aren't happy the government has committed hundreds of millions of dollars to waiving first-year fees for new students instead of increasing institutions' funding. Today they said a slight uptick in enrolments is not due to the policy, and the scheme hasn't encouraged students from poor families into tertiary study. But the first 3 students Checkpoint talked to at Victoria University of Wellington today all said they wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the policy. BA student Anastasia says fees free had a huge impact on her.
It was good financially for me because then I could help out at home as well, and I could save also for next year. I was going to do a gap year and save up because that's what a lot of people kind of advised me to do, because they were talking about how much the student loan is always on their back and how long it always takes for them to really pay it off.
Music student Mason says he was planning on working for a year before going to university.
I think it made a big impact. It made me want to come to university more since I didn't have to have the struggle of paying fees and stuff. Because I knew that my siblings came here. I saw the struggle that they went through. I was happy that I didn't have to go through the same thing.
Commerce and health psychology student Zoe says the policy persuaded her to enrol this year instead of taking a gap year. And she's sure it's helped people from poor backgrounds.
Say if they're coming from like poorer areas, they might not be as confident in their ability without having the backup for the fees free. Like they might think, oh, it's a waste of money. Whereas if they have the money to do it, they can try it, and then if they decide they don't like it, well, at least it was free.
Downtown at the campuses of Wellington Region Polytechnics Welltech and Whitireia, Zekiel Bullen is studying a Level 4 cookery course because of the free fee scheme.
Free fees helped me a lot because I'm only 16, so I don't really want the debts, I guess, and don't want to think of having debts right now. So it does help a lot for a young student.
What would you have done if the zero fee policy didn't exist?
I'd probably still be stuck at school.
And broadcasting student Kristen Jensen says the policy persuaded her to go straight into tertiary study.
It definitely took a lot of pressure off deciding whether or not I wanted to come to uni. I was very kind of tied up with yes or no, did I want to take a gap year? I decided with free fees it was better for me to start studying now, and basically that's why I'm studying.
The president of Victoria's Students' Association, Marlon Drake, says it's not just school leavers who are benefiting from the policy, which is being progressively rolled out to 3 years of free tertiary study by 2024.
Has encouraged people to enrol, or rather it's allowed people to enrol in university when they otherwise might not have. I know of a lot of students who are actually not straight out of high school, so they've worked a few years and they actually waited for a policy like this before they came, and now they've entered tertiary education because of this policy.
The government says by April, enrolments in all forms of tertiary education were down 0.2%. It had budgeted for a 3% increase in equivalent full-time students in 2018, or about 2,000 extra students. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Coming up to 18 minutes to 6, we head now to Taranaki, home of the Ranfurly Shield and one of provincial rugby's most famous grounds, the Yarrow Stadium in New Plymouth. Earlier this month it was closed due to earthquake risk, and the headlines at the time held little promise about it reopening. Closed for the foreseeable future due to significant earthquake risk at the grounds began one of many articles about its demise. Well, as Mark Twain might have said, demise was something of an overstatement. Yarrow will not close in full, just in part, because after searching the region for replacement venues, Taranaki Rugby believes it's better to have half of Yarrow than all of anything else. I asked their CEO, Jeremy Parkinson, is the stadium an earthquake risk?
Not in the capacity that we're using it at.
Right, can you explain that to me? It's clearly a wind risk there at Yarrow today, if that's where you are, but in terms of earthquake risk, there is part of that stadium that it is simply not appropriate for people to occupy, right?
Correct. So the East Stand, as we communicate now, is an earthquake-prone building with an E grade at 15% of built to 15% of new building standard, and that has been closed to the public. The West Stand, nothing wrong with the building. It is the ground that supports the building that there are concerns around in the situation where there's a significant seismic event and the stand is at full capacity with 4,900 people sitting in it. So the stadium owner, which is the Taranaki Stadium Trust, have erred on the side of caution and are closing that facility to the public. So there will be no public able to sit in the bleachers, but we will be able to use it operationally. So Sky will be able to broadcast out of it, and there's other facilities that are tied into that, but it's just if there was a seismic event, and we're talking a pretty significant one, that they couldn't guarantee the safety of people sitting in that stand.
Right, so east and west are out, is that right?
Yep, correct.
And north and south is where the people will be for the games?
Correct, and those are the terraced ends, and one of them, I think the southern or the northern terraced ends, one of them has been operational since 1937. So I suppose you talk about, is it a risk? The last 16 years, the facility has been used in its capacity as it sits now, and it hasn't been. But obviously, with the events that have situated since Christchurch and the CTV building collapsing, everyone's got the microscope scope on themselves, and effectively that's the situation we face. So it's all about looking after the public. So we have a...
So I want to take your question. You say, is it a risk? So what you're saying is the East and West are too much of a risk and therefore they will be closed to spectators, but you and the powers that be are absolutely confident in the North and South.
Correct. There is no risk to the public.
Okay. And how many people can sit in the North and South?
14,000.
So that's a good crowd, isn't it? I mean, when you're defending the Shield, you might get a crowd that big, but with all due respect to the Mitre 10 Cup, 14,000 would be a hell of a big crowd, wouldn't it, if you guys were playing Southland?
Correct. In saying that, last year when Taranaki defended the Ranfurly Shield against Manawatu on a Wednesday night after we picked it up off Canterbury, we had 9,500 people.
Jeremy, just remind me before you go on, who did you pick it up off again? Just say those lovely words. Oh, God, how did that feel?
I wasn't here then, but yeah, it's been great, and the Shield's had a life of its own. It's got its own diary. It's been booked out. It goes to a rugby club every weekend. It's at community events. So we're going to get good support this year, which we're really excited about.
And good support that will be safe when they are there.
Correct. That is correct.
Jeremy Parkinson, who is the CEO of Taranaki Rugby. In a remote mountainous region of northern Vietnam, about an hour and a half drive from Hanoi, two New Zealand animal experts are just about to sit down for lunch. The women, friends from Christchurch and Hawke's Bay, manage a bear sanctuary. They're using their expertise to help rescue moon and sun bears who've been inhumanely farmed for their gallbladder bile. It's very niche work, but as Zach Fleming found when he travelled to Vietnam earlier this year, courtesy of the Asia New Zealand Foundation, it is also very rewarding.
The sound of freedom. Manu the moon bear walking out of his cell and into a transport cage, rescued after years of abuse. He's classified as vulnerable, just one step below endangered, and is one of 18 moon bears rescued in Vietnam last year by Animals Asia, an animal welfare charity. Kept confined and farmed for their gallbladder bile, Animals Asia Vietnam director Tuan Bendixson says bears' lives pre-rescue are full of pain and suffering.
By using ultrasound machine to locate the gallbladder, once they find it, then they use a long needle, but it's about 6 inches, quite long, and they punch it through the stomach and then trying to get to the gallbladder. But obviously, they're not trained vet. None of them are vets. And secondly, is that the ultrasound machine they use is, the screen usually that small, that big, which means you can't tell, which means they'll be poking in and out until they find it. It could be something like 10 or 15 jabs before they get it right.
Life locked in a cage, stabbed with a needle longer than a ballpoint pen, day in, day out. Their bile is used in medicine and has been in Asia for thousands of years as treatment for liver or gallbladder conditions and even cancers. It's used in New Zealand too. Customs stopped 4 shipments in the past 3 years. The most recent, in December last year, 119 grams of powder, would have been worth around $20,000 on the black market. The penalty for that's 3 years in prison and a fine of up to $50,000. That's because conditions are plainly inhumane. Bears sit in cramped cages, unable to really be a bear.
Pretty much just a plain cage, just bars on the bottom. There was no water bowl, no browse, no food. There wasn't anything in the cages when we got there. It's just really barren.
So 31-year-old Christchurch-born Sarah Van Erpt is using her master's degree in conservation biology from Massey University to help them. She's been working at the sanctuary in Tam Dao National Park for more than a year now. Alongside her is 28-year-old Hawke's Bay-born Lauren Weary, who's using her double major in animal behaviour and biology from Waikato University to do the same.
Exceeded all my expectations.
Same, yeah.
I don't know really what I was expecting, but just the organisation here, Animals Asia, are, well and truly, leading the way for animal welfare in Asia.
Leading the way because of people like her.
We just can't get the same level of expertise or knowledge as we can from people like Sarah and Lawrence. That's just to say that because the education level in Vietnam is not quite up to standard yet.
175 bears live at the sanctuary. There are some Malayan sun bears as well as moon bears. They're not often farmed for bile, but are kept as display bears in resorts and restaurants. The sanctuary covers 11 hectares, has its own bear hospital and employs 90 people. There's 5 rectangular bear houses which open up to 10 outdoor enclosures. Each has a pool, trees and play furniture designed to help with rehabilitation. The bears sleep inside, otherwise, apart from 2 food restocking intermissions, they're outside all day. Sarah and Lauren are bear managers, which means, among other things, they're in charge of training other staff, rehabilitation plans and administering medicine. They also sometimes accompany staff on rescues, which can be intense.
So we've just stopped to give the bears lunch on the 3rd day of our journey. As we sort of expect, the bears change a lot as we travel, as they get more comfortable. So today we've got Manu, he's still not really eating very well.
The bears can't be flown and are often in remote locations. The most recent rescue was an 8-day round trip.
Zebedee and Tuffy are 2 that really broke my heart a little bit. Zebedee, he is from a bile farm and he was beaten around the head for escaping one day, and he had just a horrifically broken nose and he had a hole leading from his mouth up to his nasal passages and like no teeth, and it's just the sweetest, most gentle little old man bear. But you wouldn't know that he'd been through that horrific time because he's just so sweet.
They're so strong, you know.
Yeah.
They learn to trust humans again and learn how to be a bear again.
But sadly, most, if not all, of these bears will live in an enclosure like this one for the rest of their life, because they've either been treated so badly and have things like missing limbs, or they've been raised in captivity, so they can't be released into the wild. So Animals Asia has made a commitment to looking after each and every one of them for the rest of their lives.
We've got bears like Anne-Marie, who's a sun bear, and it took her over a year after her rescue to become comfortable with going outside, the other bears in her group, to play. She just really struggled. Some bears, they'll come and hand feed straight away, but some bears are like, I don't trust you, and you've really got to work to build that relationship with them.
And it's plain they do work to build those relationships. Walking around the sanctuary with Sarah and Lauren, they point out each bear's quirks and describe their personalities, while to me the bears all look the same. Bear bile farming was made illegal in Vietnam 26 years ago in 1992, but there's still around 1,000 being farmed today.
Right now, for example, in Hanoi, if you go out to West Hanoi, about 30k west, and if you go onto bear farm and you offer them money to buy bile, and they will do an extraction in front of you because they want to prove to you that it's a genuine stuff. There's a lot of fake stuff around.
Tuan says that's largely because many Vietnamese, including people in the government and police, don't think there's actually anything wrong with keeping bears in small cages to extract their bile.
We even went undercover and we got footage of bear bile extraction and give it to the police. And then the police said, well, it's not admissible in court because the video need to be taken by an authority like a police.
It costs more than $1 million a year to run the bear sanctuary. Animals Asia pays for that entirely through donations. The Vietnamese government refuses to help.
We often ask them, but they often say, well, the government have a lot of priorities, and unfortunately wildlife is way down there, so they can't help.
But after years of lobbying, in an historic move last July, the Vietnamese government agreed to a key step to putting an end to bear bile farming. It signed a memorandum of understanding with Animals Asia that'll ban the prescribing of bear bile in Vietnam by 2020, which will almost kill demand for it.
They will commit to what they signed to, but sometimes it will take a lot of pushing, and sometimes that will go slow, so yeah, we need to keep on top of it.
Tuan says Animals Asia needs another $20 million to build 5 more sanctuaries to house the 1,000 bears still in captivity that need rescuing. That'll then also bring yearly costs up to around $5 to $6 million a year, and the need for many more Sarahs and Laurens.
I would love to be around still when the bear bale farming is finished. I'd love to be a part of that when all the bears are gone from private residences and they're all safe and happy in sanctuaries.
The girls both say they'll look to extend their contracts when they come up for renewal. Neither is ready to leave their bears.
Do you guys have a favourite bear?
Oh,
We try not to have favourites, but...
There's about 20 or 175.
Yeah.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
And Zach travelled to Vietnam courtesy of the Asian New Zealand Foundation. He filed 3 stories. The next one asks, where does our government's aid money go in Vietnam? That's coming up on Checkpoint. It's 5 minutes to 6. From tomorrow, thousands of Aucklanders who use the city's train services each day will hear te reo Māori on their journeys in a New Zealand first for rail commuters. This afternoon, Auckland Transport launched a te reo Māori announcement service for its trains at Britomart Station. It's the main station down at the bottom of Queen Street. It follows the Independent Māori Statutory Board criticising AT last year about its lack of action over investing in bilingual language use on its transport network. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter John Boynton is, well, on board.
Mēnā he take mō rearea, pātohia te pātene whakatūtaraina, kei pātata ki ngā kuaha kaieke.
There were cheers as Māori actor Miriama Smith's new te reo announcement was delivered for the first time on Auckland's train system. For Glenn Wilcox, the fight to hear the language on public transport has been one he's been fronting since the Auckland Council amalgamated in 2010.
It has been a long journey with Auckland Transport, and I suppose naively I thought all they had to do was push a button. I even offered to do it myself, but thankfully they found someone better. But actually the real kaupapa was actually making that synchronised with the rest of the train stations.
Mr Wilcox has seen and heard how wonderful it is to have bilingual announcements on public transport overseas. And he knew how important it was for New Zealand to follow suit.
I've been on trains overseas and there's more than one language. And Māori is what makes Auckland unique. It's what makes New Zealand unique. You won't hear Māori on any other train in the world, but you will hear it in New Zealand and you will hear it in Auckland.
This train does not stop at Green Lane and Remuera. Please change at Newmarket or Ellerslie for Southern Line services to these stations.
Nau mai piki mai ki tēnei ratonga re whenua I Onewonga. Kāri tēnei te reina e tū ki Green Lane me Remuera.
Te reo Māori will be featured in the main safety announcements of train services at the beginning, midpoint and journey's end. Auckland Transport Chief Executive Shane Ellison says it was special to be able to hear for the first time.
To get to today is a great first step, and it normalises using te reo on trains and normalises seeing or people hearing te reo on trains.
And he feels AT is on the right track in promoting bilingual city transport.
From my perspective, it was more a question of why not? So how can we facilitate meeting the obligations that we have under the Treaty of Waitangi, celebrating what is a unique aspect of New Zealand?
Auckland Transport Māori Relationship and Policy Manager Tipa Compain is excited about the next step in efforts to make te reo Māori more visible around the city.
Stage 2, Stage 3 of our action plan on the public transport network for Auckland is about finding the right names, Māori names for the English stations, and that'll be a conversation we have with mana whenua.
The next stage will include more messages in te reo throughout the whole train journey. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton ahau.
It's about a minute and a half before 6. Lots of feedback coming in tonight on the subject of the national anthem. People, by and large, don't think Crystal did a great job of it, but many of you are saying it's a dog of a song to begin with. In fact, it has to be said, there is open contempt pouring in on the text line for the national anthem on 2101. People saying that, in fact, Crystal at least made it moderately interesting, which was a pleasant change from the dirge, the kind of monotonal dirge that it normally is. There is not much affection, it has to be said, for the national anthem amongst the Checkpoint listenership tonight. A lot of people saying how appalled they are about the collection of gallbladder bile from Zach's story in Vietnam. We'd love to hear from you also if you live in Gisborne and you are trying to do business by getting out State Highway 1 to the north. We're going to go and talk to NZTA after the 6 o'clock news, but with the closure of the Waiwaka Gorge around the Coast Road, which is a beautiful, wonderful, globally unique drive, but it ain't no alternative if you're getting freight out. So do text us on 2101 if you are one of those people. Lots of people wanting to know what's happening with the nurses and their negotiations with the DHB. We don't know. They're ongoing. We tried to talk to both parties today and they both said they'll get back to us tomorrow. Is that promising? Well, we'll ask them tomorrow. We're coming up in 15 seconds to the news with Susana Leatawa, who we first worked together in about 1990, you and I, didn't we?
We did. It was actually a little bit sooner than that, but yes.
Bloody hell.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. 2 strikes are set to go ahead next month after 4,000 public servants voted for industrial action. Public Service Association members at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment and Inland Revenue will stage 2 2-hour stoppages on the 9th and 23rd of July. Both organisations are refusing what the union says is a modest pay increase across the board. At the same time, MB is spending millions of dollars on contractors. Inland Revenue is laying off a third of its staff despite a union claim that its systems will be unable to cope with some of the government's flagship changes. The PSA National Secretary Glenn Barclay points to the Best Start payment, which is set to come in this weekend as part of the Families Package.
It starts on the 1st of July. And our members have been told they're going to have to process this manually, which will drastically increase their workload.
The PSA National Secretary Glenn Barclay. Fresh produce growers in Gisborne and Bay of Plenty say better infrastructure is needed after a major slip closed the main route between the regions. It could take more than a week to remove the 7,000 cubic metre slip in the Waiwaka Gorge, adding hours of travel time for motorists forced to drive up the East Cape instead. Gisborne is one of the country's biggest fruit and vegetable growing regions and relies on the short route to get produce out while it's still fresh. The Chief Executive for Leaderbrand Produce Gisborne, Richard Burke, says the region is trying to grow, but business could be put off without reliable infrastructure. He says along with the government, they need to come up with a way to prevent delays and losses when large slips happen. Tertiary enrolments have dropped 0.2% despite the introduction of the government's zero fee policy for new students. The fall in April enrolment figures follows several years of declining student numbers, and another drop was expected this year. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The latest figures are 250 students shy of the same time last year. The Education Ministry has forecast a fall of about 3,000 students for the full year, but that estimate does not allow for the impact of the zero fee policy. Universities say the scheme has had next to no effect on their numbers, but some students told RNZ News today they would not have enrolled this year if it were not for the policy. The government says it will publish information about the uptake of free fees soon. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
15 fire engines are fighting a blaze at an old picture theatre in Auckland. Emergency services were called to the theatre down Great North Road in Point Chevalier just before 4 this afternoon. Auckland Transport says the road is closed between Huia Road and Point Chevalier Road. Fire and Emergency Shift Manager Scott Osmond says the fire is under control. He says no one has been hurt. DOC has lodged an appeal with the Environment Court against water take consents granted to 17 avocado growers north of Kaitaia. Independent commissioners acting for the Northland Regional Council granted the growers consent to draw more than 2 million cubic metres a year from the Aupori aquifer. DOC objected strongly at the time, saying the council doesn't have the research to support that decision. Its statutory manager, Hamish Eglinton, says that is the basis of the appeal.
We just don't think enough is known about the potential effects. There doesn't seem to be a lot of scientific advice and a lot of background and data on what effects this will have.
Mr Eglinton says at stake is the Kaimaumo wetland. It's of national importance and the effect of the massive groundwater take is uncertain. The Taranaki provincial rugby side will defend the Ranfurly Shield at Yarrow Stadium this season, despite its 2 covered stands being closed due to earthquake risk. The east stand was shut down in November last year and the west stand earlier this month. The Taranaki Rugby Union Chief Executive Jeremy Parkinson says it will use the open seating and terraces at either end of the ground instead.
And those are the terraced ends, and one of them, I think the southern or the northern terraced ends, one of them has been operational since 1937.
Mr Parkinson says these parts of the ground are considered safe and can accommodate up to 14,000 fans. Television coverage and some stadium operations will still be carried out in the West Stand. Some of the 8 New Zealand weightlifting athletes excluded from this week's Oceania Championships in New Caledonia for not submitting a whereabouts form to drug testers on time have been refunded their airfares. 40 lifters in total in the Oceania region have been caught out by a new ruling that requires the information to be submitted 2 months before a major competition. Weightlifting New Zealand's High Performance Director Simon Kent says the organisation has been doing everything it can to work with the athletes, who have been very understanding.
Some of the athletes decided to still travel, use it as an experience and have a training camp and support their teammates, which was fantastic. And OWN's Olympic Weightlifting New Zealand worked with the other athletes to find an outcome that was favourable all. So some received refunds and didn't travel. And we worked really hard with all 8 athletes to find the best outcome we could. And we're really keen as an organisation to learn from this.
Simon Kent. The New Zealand sailors Peter Burling and Blair Tuke are taking a well-earned break before deciding whether they'll tackle another Olympic campaign. The Rio gold medalists and America's Cup champions today finished a gruelling Volvo Round the World campaign, and Tuke says they won't be rushing into a decision on the 2020 Tokyo Olympics anytime soon.
We want to make sure we do it right if we do it, so we'll sort that out over the next couple of months, and then obviously the America's Cup's there as well, so there's plenty going on, but a bit of time off first and foremost would be great.
New Zealand sailor Blair Tuke. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tokoro Wilson putting together a collection of fairy tales from around the Pacific. Dana Johansson looks back on the weekend's sport. Has she been enthralled by the beautiful game? And we begin a radio edition of a special RNZ Stuff collaboration, Going Fishing, a tale of friendship and betrayal in underground New Zealand.
And the winner of National Flash Fiction Day is Anita Arloff reading He, She, It, They.
She sleeps in his spoon, he wakes her toes first. He fries her tomatoes, she peels in the sun. He books Dunedin, she knits him a scarf.
Arts, music, books. Join me, Karen Hay, on Lately at 10 p.m. weeknights on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. Showers, some heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms in the west, easing late tomorrow. Snow to about 700 metres tonight and 500 metres tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, a few showers, mostly about the ranges today, then mainly about the coast tomorrow. Snow to 500 metres in Wairarapa tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine today, a few showers tomorrow, some heavy with hail and snow to 500 metres. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, apart from Clutha, fine, however frequent showers and snow to 100 metres in Otago tonight, and coastal Canterbury and Marlborough tomorrow with snow to 400 metres. Bulla and Westland, showers, some heavy with hail, clearing from the south tomorrow. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, wintry showers, persistent this evening with snow to 100 metres overnight. And Chatham Islands, showers today, then fine. It's 7 minutes past 6 and you're with John Campbell on Checkpoint.
You know that the analogue clock, that's powered by a battery? Yeah, it's terribly unreliable. And the digital is powered by power.
I'm so old-fashioned because I don't even look at the digital. It frightens me.
What year did we first work together, Susanna?
Well, I think it was Frank Perry's newsroom, and I want to say maybe
Frank.
1989.
Yeah, Uncle Frank.
Something like that.
He was the boss in Wellington. He was great.
He's the man.
Wonderful boss.
Yeah.
They were good days, weren't they?
Very, very good days.
Yeah, neither of us have aged a bit.
No, not a peep.
Thanks. Lovely to have you back here, Susanna. Thank you. Susanna Leatawa doing the news tonight. A bit of a treat. It could take more than a week for the, Moana Maniapoto, who knows a lot about music, has said our national anthem is a dog. So that's that, really. We'll have to get a new one. It could take more than a week for the main route between Gisborne and Bay of Plenty to reopen after thousands of cubic metres of earth and rock tumbled onto the road. In the meantime, motorists will be forced to drive up around the East Cape, instead adding hours to their travel time. Fruit and vegetable growers are worried about the disruption that will cause to business, while the local mayor is concerned about people who may need to travel the route for medical treatment. The Transport Agency's National Operations Manager, Mark Owen, says they are working as fast as they can, but can't say for sure when the Waiweka Gorge will reopen.
Yeah, that's the challenging question. I mean, obviously we've got this approximately 7,000 cubic metres of material that's come down. We've got crews that are attacking it from both sides because the road is closed. But they're working hard to move the material. But we're talking days, not hours, in terms of the time it'll take to remove all that material and then assess it and make it safe. 7,000
cubic metres that has come down. What's still up there that is vulnerable?
Well, the photos show that what's there looks relatively clean. There's still some small material coming down, and obviously coming down from that height still presents quite a danger and a risk, particularly for the workers in the area. So they can only work during the daylight hours. And they have got spotters there to just keeping an eye on things. But once they have cleared the material at the base of the slip, then our geotechnical engineers can make an assessment of where to from here. And as soon as they deem it safe, then we'll be able to get that road open again.
It's a hell of a road, that road through the gorge. Anyone who's driven through there knows that there are just slip possibilities everywhere. But has there been enough money spent, enough care taken around remediation of at-risk areas?
It's like all New Zealand topography. It's just the nature of the land and the environment that we live in. I mean, it's beautiful and vast and challenging and rugged. And this gorge, which I think is about 38 kilometres long, goes through some pretty high hills, and it's obviously got the river alongside it as well. So it presents lots of challenges, but it's none that we can't sort of work our way through. And so we're keeping an eye on, for example, this area is being monitored by our guys in terms of the geotechnical nature of that area. But it's like all parts of New Zealand. When you sort of get wet weather, the odd earthquake, there is a risk that we will find that the hills start to move and material will come down.
Are you underfunded though? Because you find yourself working your way through these issues after the fact. And I just have a sense from people who are connected with NZTA that I talk to that there is real frustration about your inability to be preemptive with situations like this.
No, it's not a funding issue. It's just, again, there's a lot of areas across New Zealand where we have these steep mountains. And the challenge is you could go and address one slip and you've got another 3 that occur down the road. So it's a matter of being vigilant and working out where the highest risk areas are, working out what the mitigation is for those areas. But it is just the nature of New Zealand. There's a lot of areas across New Zealand where, due to the nature of the mountainsides and the topography and the rainfall we have, that we can have slips occur on a large percentage of those highway mountainous roads.
So, Mark, what's Plan B? How do you get to Gisborne from the north now?
So there's 2 detour options. So if you want to go to the north, that's around East Cape on State Highway 35. It's a fairly long detour. It probably adds an extra 4 hours to the journey. The other
4 hours, and that would be right.
To the journey. Yep.
I mean, it's a wonderful drive, but you ain't going anywhere fast when you go around the coast, are you?
No, that's right, and you do need to sort of take extra care on some of those that tight, windy coastal route, but it is very scenic. The other route is to head south towards Napier on State Highway 2, and then take the inland route State Highway 5 to Taupo. So that's another alternative, but again, this is adding hours to the journey.
Wow. So in fact, there is no way in that isn't a seriously extra amount of time.
No, that's right, and that's why our crew's, very aware of this. This is sort of a major link between Gisborne and Aporiki, and there's daily freight and goods go that way. So we're very aware of that, which is why we've got the crews that will be working hard to move that material and get that road open as quickly and as safely as they can.
And there used to be a wonderful train line to the south, didn't there, between Gisborne and Napier, but that's gone as well. So poor old Gisborne is a little bit stranded, isn't it?
Well, it just puts a lot more pressure on the roading network, which is why we need to be vigilant around our maintenance and working to keep those routes open when we can. We're obviously aware also there's a weather event that is coming up for the North Island over the next 24, 48 hours. So there is potential for that Napier-Taupo road to be affected by snow. And over the next few days, ice is going to be a major concern as well. So that obviously presents some other challenges for people that are travelling through that area.
There's still the road out through Wairoa, I guess, heading south, and that's a coastal route. So unless there's heavy flooding and weird slips there, you're probably safe. But you're not worried about Gisborne being cut off entirely, are you?
No, not at this stage, no, because as you say, there's a road to the north, State Highway 35, road to the south, State Highway 2, and as you said, there's actually another road, State Highway 38, which takes you through the beautiful Te Urewera National Park, but it's a very windy, unsealed road, so that would be sort of a last resort.
So, State Highway 2 through the gorge, which is the main and really only sensible route, particularly if you are carrying freight, north from Gisborne, you say to Portiki, but in fact it's to Auckland, Tauranga, it's to the top half of the North Island, isn't it? When do you hope to have it open?
Well, we'll make an assessment sort of as the crews work through it this week, but it definitely will be closed for days, given the volume of material that's come down. But they'll be working as hard and as fast as they can, with all safety caution taken as well, to get that slip clear and get a lane open as soon as we can.
This week?
Well, certainly, of course, there's a whole lot of dependencies. I mean, it depends on the weather, and it just depends on how quickly they can remove it. And obviously the geotechnical engineers need to make an assessment of, once they've cleared it, is it safe and what we need to do before we can open it up. But we're certainly working as hard, as fast as we can to get it open as soon as we can.
Mark Owen from NZTA. 7 mayors and a regional council chair are calling on the Transport Agency to finally commit to a plan to fix State Highway 1 between Otaki and Levin. The agency is re-evaluating a planned 4-lane highway aimed at making the road safer and opening up the corridor between the two towns, which are, of course, north of Wellington. Mayors from across the Manawatu-Whanganui region will lobby the agency to make sure that even if the planned project doesn't go ahead, the road, which one mayor describes as Death Highway, is still improved. Laura Dooney filed this report.
Simon Burgess's house is in the way of two of the options that were, in February, proposed for the expressway, where it would bypass Levin. He says the re-evaluation of the road will leave he and fellow residents in limbo for longer.
We don't know what's going to happen and when, and so I don't know. It still hangs over your head, but you can't really do much about it, so you just have to pretend it's not happening, ignore it, and hope that it might go away, which is unrealistic, but what else can we do, really? Everything's on hold. I mean, you don't know whether you can spend money on the house. You don't know whether you should be looking for something else.
Mr Burgess says there's a lot of uncertainty about what the future holds.
What does re-evaluation mean? Does it mean they're not going to do it? Does it mean they're going to start from scratch?
The Transport Agency says a decision on the project will be released in 2 to 3 months. It was expected to come out about now. It released 9 options for the road earlier this year, with 400 homes potentially affected. But the Transport Agency is now having to re-evaluate its plans as part of its investment proposal, after the government developed a new draft policy on land transport. Horizons Regional Council Chair Bruce Gordon says the government talks about safety and resilience in that draft policy statement.
And in this case, the road is subject to closures through flooding events. It's closed regularly through accidents, and it's the death highway at the moment, which is the only one in our region.
Mr Gordon says the region could make do with 2 lanes instead of 4 if necessary, as long as land was saved to extend the road later. He says if the new route isn't built, the region could suffer.
It would stifle growth in our region. It would take away a lot of business confidence that we're starting to enjoy. At the moment, we're one of the surge regions of New Zealand. And to us, it's very, very important that this section of highway gets the upgrade that it's so overdue.
Horowhenua Mayor Michael Fayan says he understands the new government might have different priorities. He says no matter what decision's made, the town needs a bypass.
Levin absolutely needs to get our blockages and our roading through State Highway 1 in the middle of town. There is no question about it, and it's got to happen sooner than later. The road between Otaki and Levin is definitely a dangerous road, and everybody knows that, and there's been a number of fatals and severely injured people there.
He says the biggest problem for people in Levin is they just don't know where the road is going to go.
If the national government had stayed in, I think that the road would have been, they would have made their decisions where it's going to go and the like, but we have a government that has a different strategy. We've got to operate off the coalition strategy.
The Transport Agency wrote to residents last week, telling them they'll have to wait another couple of months before an update. It says it acknowledges the lack of certainty is a cause of concern and frustration for people affected. In the meantime, safety improvements are being done on State Highway 1 between Levin and the Manawatu River. For Checkpoint, Laura Dooney.
6:19. The Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters says he's not concerned about multiple looming strikes. The Public Service Association today announced that 4,000 of its members working at Inland Revenue and the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment will strike twice for 2 hours each next month. Nurses are also scheduled to walk off the job on Thursday of next week, and teachers are currently considering a pay offer if they reject it. That could also lead to strike action. National says the sheer number of strikes will slow the economy down and create huge uncertainty for business. But Winston Peters says his government empathises with workers and the risk of strike action is not as bad as in the past.
If you look at past periods in our history, there were, over 560,000 days being lost during that time compared to a very low base now. And as we try and sort out some of the massive areas of conditions and payments and deficits that people have received, we contemplate it'll take some time. We're not unsympathetic to demands being made upon us. We just want those people who are making those demands to understand we can't fix everything up in the space of, in terms of getting ready for a budget, 6 months.
The PSA says Inland Revenue is laying off a third of its staff, despite its members there saying its systems are unable to cope with current and upcoming changes. The Best Start payment, a $60 a week payment for all new parents up until their baby is 1, is set to begin this Sunday. But the PSA says Inland Revenue systems won't be able to cope, and staff are being told they will have to process each new payment manually. Mr. Peters says the complicating factor is the July 7 income tax return processing.
The fact that the technology has been worked on by us suggests that we're aware of it. The speed of getting it to the position that needs to be by payments of the 7th of July is also being, worked on in terms of any difficulties by manual preparations, which the department is fully aware of.
In a statement, Inland Revenue says it's chosen to manually process Best Start applications for the first few weeks of July so it can focus on processing annual July 7 tax returns and customers can get their tax refunds as soon as possible. It says this will not have any impact on the small number of people receiving their Best Start entitlements from July 1st. 6:21. The Crown says the boat that washed up on a beach in Northland with 500 kilos of methamphetamine, yes, you heard that correctly, on board, led police to investigate dealers, including siblings, on trial at the High Court. Rick and Siobhan Wellington have both denied charges of possession and supply of methamphetamine. Edward Gay filed this report from the High Court in Auckland.
The Crown prosecutor, Nick Webby, said the case has its origins on Northland's 90 Mile Beach in June 2016.
The police seized 501 kilograms of methamphetamine destined for the New Zealand market from a boat which had washed up on 90 Mile Beach in Northland.
It's the largest seizure of its kind in New Zealand. A woman connected to the boat led investigators to siblings Ricky and Siobhan Wellington. Nick Webby said intercepted phone calls showed the siblings and others connected to them used coded drug talk, frequently changed phone numbers, and used apps that allowed them to send encrypted messages.
Methamphetamine, for example, was often referred to as work. Cash was often referred to as clothes, or laundry, or washing. Counting cash was often referred to as folding washing or folding clothes.
Mr Webby said Siobhan Wellington made 4 trips from Auckland to Christchurch, where her brother lived in October 2016.
Siobhan Wellington, you were here, was the important link between her brother and the drug distribution operation that he was running in Christchurch and the people from Auckland who were supplying him with that methamphetamine.
He said each time she was delivering large amounts of methamphetamine. Mr Webby said when the police wrapped up their investigation, they raided Ricky Wellington's home.
They found $150,000 in cash in a shoebox inside a bag in his wardrobe. They found approximately $8,000 in cash in a shoulder bag in the same wardrobe.
There were also 4 cars. Mr Webby said the cash and cars were all proceeds from lucrative meth dealing. Police also searched a hotel room connected to Ricky Wellington. Inside the safe, they found 425 grams of methamphetamine. Ricky Wellington's lawyer, Mark Ryan, said the Crown alleges his client received methamphetamine, but no drugs were found on him when he was arrested.
Presumably because he's never found with any methamphetamine on him, it's supplied. That's for you.
He asked the jurors to keep an open mind, a point also made by Siobhan Wellington's lawyer, Annabelle Maxwell-Scott.
You're going to be shown evidence in the form of mainly telephone communications, and you're not going to hear from the people who make those phone calls. So I'm just going to ask you to be very careful about some of that evidence.
She said the Crown was essentially asking the jurors to make inferences. Atu I te kōti mātua, ko Edward Gayahau.
Is it animal cruelty or pest control? Animal welfare groups are outraged after footage released on social media showed a possum being struck so hard in the face it flies backwards through the air. The possum was sitting on a fence post on a farm in Waimate when a man gets out of his car at night, approaches the stunned possum and hits it hard in the face. Now, the SPCA and Poor Justice say while possums are pests, the act is one of deliberate animal cruelty. And Waimate District Mayor Craig Rowley agrees. And a warning, if you're watching, particularly with children, the Facebook video is indeed pretty disturbing.
Oh, I think it's absolutely disgusting. That we realise they're a pest, yes they are a pest, but there's humane ways of dealing with our pest problem down this way. Obviously we've got wallabies, which are a major issue down here as well, but no, it's that just because it's a pest doesn't condone that type of behaviour.
Can we talk about the extent of the problem? And I'm not condoning that type of behaviour, but how bad is the possum problem?
So the possum problem down here is not as bad as the West Coast. It's not. There's a few farms that have some serious issues with them, but it's not nowhere near as big as the wallaby issue that we have down here.
And your wallabies, how do you get rid of them?
A lot of them it's done by pest destruction guys shooting and poisoning is probably the two biggest ways that they get rid of them down here.
How are you able to do that humanely? Because clearly that is something that matters to you.
Yeah, well, it is, and obviously there's a lot of debate about how humane the poisoning is. It's a difficult argument to get into. Obviously, there's a huge economic
cost
on the economy down here with the wallaby situation and that sort of thing. I guess it's like any pest destruction. Is the rabbit virus humane? It's a bit of a depending on which side of the fence you sit. I guess the economic cost sort of outweighs the humane side of it to a certain extent.
Hell, it's a balancing act, isn't it? But in terms of
it is a balancing act. Yeah.
In terms of the possum punching, though, there is no balancing act there. You just say that is just totally unacceptable.
It is. It's not achieving anything. It's not as though they're trying to humanely dispatch a possum, and that it's obviously just a lark and that sort of thing. And I certainly wouldn't condone that type of behaviour to any animal, whether they're a pest or any other sort of animal.
How much does it cost you to do pest control? Because you don't have a big ratepayer base there, do you?
No. Well, most of the pest control comes under Environment Canterbury, so they're responsible for monitoring and undertaking pest control. Obviously, there's a cost to the individual farmers through their ECAN rates. It's built into that, and it's quite a substantial sum in quite a few instances.
Bovis, you've got a new Bovis farm there, haven't you?
Yes, we have. Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. What's the feeling in the region? Is there real trepidation about the spread, or do you think it's controlled?
Well, we'll see if it's controlled. That's going to be something that we're going to. This is a long game that the MPI are playing to try and eradicate it. Yeah, there's a lot of feeling around the district. Obviously, it's had some major effects on particularly our dairy industry down here. There's an awful lot of very stressed farm owners and farm workers. So we're just going to have to wait and see how it plays out, I think, over the next few months or few years, depending on how long it's going to take to get this disease under control.
Do you have an ear to the ground in terms of what the farmers of Waimate think about how MPI are going? Do the people you represent think it was the right call, and do they think that MPI can actually achieve control?
Yeah, well, it depends on who you talk to. Like, I've spoken to some farmers who were keen to see management of the disease, obviously because it's sort of when it comes down to eradication, it's put a lot of people's sort of lives on hold. Obviously, they've got stock waiting to go to slaughter where they think they could better manage it. It has been managed throughout the world and other places where it is. But of course, because it's quite isolated down here, and they tell me that it is just one strain. I believe it's just one particular strain. So MPI have an understanding that they think they can eradicate it, and if they can, I think the long-term benefits are very good.
Craig Rowley, the Waimate District Mayor. Just before we go, lots of feedback on the quality of our roads. Just from Patrick, our roads are a major headache. The West Coast Road in the South Island is a major concern. It was never made for the amount of traffic that drives over it now. Tourist bus after tourist bus, camper van after camper van on roads not built for it. It will cost us in the end. Balance is what we need to focus on. And speaking of balance, a huge pendulum swing back towards people who were very fond of the National Anthem at first. It was just people saying, get rid of it. Now people are saying, no, I like it. And lots of you like it best when it's in Māori. So I would say we've ended the evening 50-50 on the National Anthem. Thank you so much for your feedback and thank you for your company. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, that's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The PSA says IRD staff have been told they'll have to manually process the new Best Start payments to parents. One reason they're walking off the job next month. Produce growers say the government needs to come up with a better way to prevent delays to transporting fresh produce from the regions. The government zero fee policy for new university students has failed to encourage enrolments from poor families. And DOC appealed a decision to allow 17 avocado growers north of Kaitaia to take water from the Aupori aquifer. Our next news and weather is at 7.
On Gone Fishing, Gail Maney served 15 years for the murder of Dean Fuller Sands, but she says she never knew him. In fact, she thinks he wasn't even murdered.
They said that you're under arrest and we're charging you for the murder of Dean Fuller Sands. I was shocked. I'd just taken my children to school.
There was a Mark Franklin that